this is something that's actually kind of important for both macro and microeconomics, especially the macro when you talk about unemployment. But there's actually a supply and demand for labor, right? And if you've worked, you've held a job, you are the supplier of labor. The price of labor we're going to call the wage. The more, that's what you earn, that's what you sell an hour of your time for. So as the wage goes up, people work more, they supply more work. If you've ever been called in for overtime, you know that. They say, we're going to pay you time and a half, and you say, I will come to work, I'm going to supply more work. That's from our point of view as workers. Now, if you're a business, you demand workers, right? And again, if it's cheaper, you're going to hire more people. So as the wage goes down, you're going to have more people being hired. Right? So somewhere in this market is what we've already talked about for this lesson. You've got an equilibrium wage, and you've got an equilibrium quantity of workers. All right? And so what is the equilibrium wage? It all depends. Right? I mean, if I'm an NFL quarterback, it might be quite high. If I'm a doctor or a lawyer, it might be very high, or an engineer. But other occupations, and what's making the news recently is fast food workers. The equilibrium wage is pretty low. Right? Now, politicians have banded together, and now there's a minimum wage. Some people actually say it should be higher than it is. Some people are talking about $15 an hour. Right? So what would happen if the minimum wage were $15 an hour? Right? Well, we could think about who would like that. Right? If you work in that job, you get more money. Right? So suppliers, the workers, the people who supply their labor for an hour, get $15 for that hour. And that's awesome, right? The problem is that people they don't always get a job at that price. Right? Anytime you go to the restaurant, if you go to like the soda machine, it's all automated, or if you give change and it comes out as the machine gives you coins, they've actually not hired somebody. And so if workers cost too much money, they'll actually get a machine to do the job, or just have some other way of doing it, do it online. And so, yes, if you can make $15, that's great, but the problem is that this quantity demanded for workers is going to be very low. All right, so not everybody's going to get a job at $15 an hour. At the same time, a lot of people are going to be out working. There's a lot of people who can't afford to work unless they make enough money to cover child care, cover commute, cover other expenses. And so there's going to be a lot of workers, not a lot of jobs. This is surplus workers, and if you take a macro class, you call it unemployment. Right? Now, under normal circumstances, if the market's allowed to work, you're going to have all these people who are looking for jobs saying, you know what, $15 is too high, I'll work for $14. I'll work for $13. And they'll lower the wage down until they can find a job. And as the wage drops, you see more hiring going on. And so when we've talked about market forces, this unemployment, in theory at least, should fix itself. That if there's unemployed people at $15 an hour, somebody will work for less and get hired at the lower price. But what happens with the minimum wage law, and that is an example of a price floor, is that there's a law that says that that's never going to happen. You cannot go to a business and say, I'll work for less than minimum wage. They can't come to you and say, please work for more minimum wage. And so all the market forces that bring you from disequilibrium to equilibrium are locked in. And by law, this disequilibrium is in place. All right, and so that's one reason why minimum wage is criticized, because it might lead to unemployed workers. Now, why would people have minimum wage? There's a lot of good reasons to have it, right? You can't live on $6 an hour. You have to have 2 or 3 jobs to do it. And so there's a social reason to do it. There's reasons, political reasons, where voters, unions, things like that might have the clout to get it passed. Right? You can't tell somebody to work for so little that they can't afford to live. Right? So there's social reasons to have a minimum wage. The economics of it, though, says that there will be people out of work and actually fewer jobs as a result. And so you can make a political argument for it or a social argument, but the economics a lot of times will say that there will be unemployment at too high of a wage. Now, that's a price floor. The wage cannot fall lower than the floor. And you can have other price floors as well. A lot of times farmers will get a minimum price on milk and some other things, it helps the farmers. But it also means that there's surplus milk that gets given away at schools or turned into cheese or destroyed. And it also means that if you buy a gallon of milk, it costs more. Right? So there's other examples of price controls that we might talk about elsewhere. Now, as for the price ceiling, that is where the market wants to be high. And the market price wants to be high. But people don't like it that way. So there's a couple examples. The one that you always see in textbooks is rent control, which doesn't so much happen around here. But the idea is that in New York City and other cities, rents are ridiculous. Right? If you've ever looked at DC, San Francisco, or New York, looking at a rent, it's like $3,000 a month or something. That's a lot, right? So who would benefit from having a law that says rents are lower? Anybody who doesn't want to pay that much money, right? So New York was known for, like, back in World War II, they had a maximum price on rents. And what happened was, if the market price is here, the legal price is locked down here, right? And so what would happen is you have all these people moving to New York who can afford to do it, right? Nowadays, there's people who say, I can't afford to live there, I'm not moving to that city. There's fewer people trying to live there. And there's actually more apartments. But if you have this rent control in place, all those people who normally would just never go and try and find an apartment, they do go because they can afford it if they can find an apartment. All right, so these cities with rent control are notorious for being unable to find a place to live because you've got all these people, more demand, and you actually have less supply. You have buildings that fall apart, buildings that don't get built. You have people who maybe would rent out a room but just don't because they can't collect enough rent. They might as well just use it as a closet or something. And so there's fewer places to rent, less supply, and there's more demand. So this, just like a minimum wage locks in a surplus of workers who want jobs, this is a shortage of buildings and places to rent. And again, the market would say the following: I really want a place to live, I can afford it. How can I pay more so I get a place to live? If you could, you would get a place. But if there's a law that says that you can't pay too much, then you wind up with a permanent shortage